Yeah, first of all, thank you, Brianna, for all you're doing to bring truth to the public because you're a big part of conveying what's really going on. The mainstream media, for me, I dwell on the New York Times because I've been reading it since I was 8 years old. That's a long time. It's so disappointing to me, so disappointing because I loved the paper when I was young. It ran the Pentagon Papers. It
Mm.
ran the exposés of Watergate. It told the truth. It aimed to get at the real truth. Now you can barely read it for any truth because basically an unnamed senior official said the following. We know who it is typically, but in any event, it's just a narrative for the US government. And there have been moments, by the way, for example, when the Nord Stream pipeline was blown up, uh, which was a US operation. And I said to a very senior New York Times reporter, I think the US did it. And he said,
Hmm.
of course the US did it. And I said,
Really?
yes. And I said, but your paper says that Russia probably did it. He says, oh, the editors, and kind of laughed nervously. And I said, no, I used to uh, depend on the paper. It's not right, this approach. He says, well, yeah, that paper's kind of dead and gone. It was very sad, actually, the conversation. And I would be mostly sad rather than mad about it if the consequences weren't
Yeah.
so high, because we're just not told the truth about anything consequential right now. Now, what does it add up to? It's kind of strange. The public does not believe the government by and large. This is true on foreign policy. Biden's extremely unpopular on foreign policy. Uh, his handling of the Middle East gets terrible, uh, uh, very high disapproval. The Ukraine war, the same. Most of our foreign policy has almost nothing to do with the electorate or the public. Uh, and the public's not well informed, but they're not believing the mainstream media. They're often tuning out or listening because that's what they listen to, but they don't really believe it. And that's a kind of interesting phenomenon. I'm not sure even the government uh, expects to believe it to be believed. When I watch Admiral Kirby
Mm.
at the White House, all I see all the time is an irrepressible smirk on his face.
Hmm.
He knows he's lying. He does not have good self control of his facial muscles. So you can always tell a Kirby
Relatable.
lie. Yes, and it's there all the time. It's a smirk that says, "Yeah, I know I'm telling you bullshit, but anyway, I got to tell you that's our government policy, the bullshit." And
Yeah.
this goes on and on. So it's very dangerous, though, because not that the public believes it, but that we never get to stop this increasingly dangerous behavior, which is being undertaken for other reasons, for reasons that the public is not being told about. No one has explained to the public what is really a 30-year project to expand our pieces on the board all over the former Soviet Union. No one's explained Project Ukraine. No one has explained to the public that Zbig Brzezinski, by the way, whom I liked and thought was really a smart guy, how he laid out in 1997 the strategy. Clearly, it's in a paper called "The Strategy for Eurasia" in Foreign Affairs magazine. He says by 2005 to 2010, we'll be inviting Ukraine to join NATO. This was a long term plan. It's backfired. It's gone terribly wrong. And you ask me, what's the truth about Ukraine? The truth is that Ukrainians are dying or being seriously wounded at a rate of typically more than 1,000 per day right now,
Hmm.
sometimes even twice that number. There's an incredible destruction of Ukrainian society underway right now. And the few people that are in charge of this policy, whether it's Zelensky, I don't know if he's in charge. People say he'd be killed if he tried anything else. But the few people that are in charge on the Ukrainian side and the very few people that are in charge on the American side, because they're running this whole war, are really fighting to the last Ukrainian right now. This is what's actually happening. It's terrifying. This is not a democratically elected government in Ukraine. This is a government of martial law that has overstayed its constitutional limit. There is no internal constraint. People are being shot at the rivers, the border with Romania, for example, if they try to swim across the river to avoid conscription. People are being dragged off the streets right now because they're being sent to the front lines with no training, essentially. Maybe they're told how to handle a gun and how to load it. But then they're sent off to the front lines and they're dying in huge numbers right now. And this is American policy. This is our policy. This is supposedly in the defense of freedom. This isn't in the defense of freedom. This is in the quest to put our peace on the board in this game of risk that we're playing. Now, it's all turning extraordinarily dangerous. The Ukrainian regime is very radicalized. It is fighting for its survival as a regime and killing a lot of its citizens in the process. But it's doing things that are extraordinarily dangerous, sometimes at the provocation. The British, for example, always provoking. They were an empire longer than we've been an empire, and their behavior is even worse, though they have less power now. But they always tell the Ukrainians, go smash the Russians wherever you can. And a couple of weeks ago, the Ukrainians hit the radar of Russia's anti-nuclear war early warning system. Are you kidding? Are you kidding? You want to really end the world by destabilizing the early warning system against a nuclear attack of a nuclear superpower? But they did that at 2 sites. I got alarm bells ringing in my inbox by people who know, by real rocket scientists, by the way, who told me, what are they doing? You know, if you have any way to get information to Washington, send it to Washington. This is so dangerous, so reckless. Now we have Soviet, excuse me. This is how that even that mistake is part and parcel of our strange and phony narrative. We have a Russian flotilla. There is no Soviet Union anymore. We have a Russian flotilla in Cuba right now. And you know, why? Well, the Russians would say, look what you're doing in our neighborhood.
Right.
That was the original idea of Khrushchev back in the fall of 1961 and spring of 1962, when Khrushchev put in nuclear missiles into Cuba. And his foreign minister, Andrei Gromyko, was horrified. Chairman, what are you doing? We're going to have World War III? And Khrushchev said, no, it's nothing about World War. It's to show the Americans some of their own medicine. You know, they have their missiles pointing at us from Turkey, so we can put them in Cuba. Well, it almost led to the end of the world. And so miscalculations are really possible in this world. We've come close several times to complete devastation. We're not governed by, the brightest bulbs in the box in many times. And there are lots of people in the mix that can do lots of things for strange reasons, for mischief, by accident, by screw-ups. And so we should stay away from these dangers. This is the basic point.
Yeah, I wonder if you saw there's a statement that Zelensky made recently. I think he was in Singapore, where he analogized Ukraine to Palestine and said after a pro forma sort of, of course, after October 7th, Israel had a right to defend itself. He went on to say, if basically that Palestine also has the right to self-determination. And really, framed up this analogy, I'm looking for the exact quote here. He says, okay, so we must respect international law. Ukraine recognizes two states, both Israel and Palestine, and will do everything it can to convince Israel to stop, to end this conflict, to prevent the suffering of civilians. You alluded to the idea that Zelensky's, in between a rock and a hard place, that he might not even want to continue this war, but he feels like he'll be taken out if he pushes back against the United States and the West, who have been very clear about their desire to simply use Ukraine and Ukrainian bodies to quote unquote weaken Russia, no matter how empty, how poorly that objective is actually panning out. Did you see that comment, and do you see that as a kind of a subtle dig at the West in an attempt to sort of push back and reframe this as, well, maybe it isn't the West, maybe it isn't the United States that it's so deeply invested in international law. Maybe the rules-based order is about America forcing the world to follow its rules, not about there being any kind of objective rules that we can all follow in terms of a legal system.
Well, I think in any event, Zelensky's a desperate individual in a desperate regime. And so he says lots of things that are not so simple to parse. But I think what the public should understand is that Russia's aim all along for basically since the 1990s was to keep NATO out of its next door, to keep NATO out of Ukraine. And that was true for basically the 25 years of Project Ukraine. And when Russia launched its military operation on February 24th, 2022, the aim was to push Ukraine to declare neutrality. This has been the basic Russian purpose for the whole period. And immediately Zelensky said, within a few days, even by before the end of February 2022, well, neutrality might be possible. And what happened was in March, as people have come to know, and again, this is one of those things where I knew it firsthand, the Ukrainians and the Russians started to exchange documents for ending all of the conflict. This is 2.5 years ago, for ending this war based on neutrality. And it would have worked. And the Turkish foreign ministry, which is very skilled, they've been doing foreign affairs in the Black Sea region for 500 years, since the Ottoman control of Constantinople, the Ottoman conquest, 1453. The Turks are very good at it. They became mediators. And the two sides reached an agreement in essence. There were still some fine points, but the US and UK told them, no, keep fighting. You'll win. We're going to crush Russia with our economic sanctions. We're going to crush Russia with our super weapons, with our HIMARS and our Patriot missiles. You're going to defeat Russia. You're going to get everything. Boris Johnson famously infamously went to talk to Zelensky in early April 2022, telling him, no, we'll never back you if you go for neutrality. This is Project Ukraine. And it's been 2.5 years, about 500,000 deaths of Ukrainians since then, for nothing. Now, I told them very explicitly, my Ukrainian former friends, they stopped listening to me. They didn't like anything I was saying. They thought I was a Putin apologist and all the rest. Mm-hmm. I was trying to tell them on the basis of 40 years of experience of American foreign policy. I told them a basic thing. You're going to be the Afghanistan of Europe unless you understand the trap the U.S. is getting you into. No, Mr. Sachs, you're completely wrong. Then they stopped talking to me. But what we're seeing is exactly Ukraine becoming the Afghanistan of Europe. What do I mean by that? I meant Afghanistan was in war for decades. It was destroyed. Its civil culture destroyed, the economy destroyed, the organization of the state destroyed, the infrastructure destroyed. That's American handiwork. We were there. We were there all that time. All we wanted was our place there, our piece on the board. But that's what's happening in Ukraine too. At a point, maybe individuals in a regime that have gone all the way down that gangplank can't get off it. So that may be the situation. But the United States could stop this war in a moment. All that has to happen is Biden has to pick up the phone or press his button, because no one picks up a phone anymore, and presses Zoom and gets Vladimir Putin on the other side and said, Project Ukraine, taking NATO all the way to your border, not a great idea. Let's call it a day. We won't expand NATO anymore. You stop the war. Wrap this up so that we can get on to other things. That's what it would take to end the fighting.
Earlier you made reference to the fact that United Kingdom has been doing empire a lot longer than the United States of America. It just has less power now than it used to. And you've also written recently about increasingly multipolar world, and the fact that the BRICS coalition now has a greater share of global output than the G7 countries, the traditional Western bloc. And I do wonder how you think kind of an increasingly multipolar world and the diminishment of Western power might start to impact American strategy, its ability to put its pieces around the world and to have complete dominance. And I wonder in particular whether you see any of this playing out in the Middle East, as, to your point about Kirby and some of the White House spokespeople that have been before the public selling this story that a ceasefire is on the table and that it's only Hamas that needs to get on board, an effort to do this side deal with Saudi Arabia to encourage normalization with Israel in a way that would undermine a push from Arab states to actually follow through on a two-state solution and a Palestinian state. I mean, how is all of that working together? And it does seem like you've expressed some optimism there that perhaps because of the diminished power of the West, that we might actually get to see some seriousness about a two-state solution.
Yeah, we're in a really, really interesting moment. Interesting, people might not like it to be so interesting, but we're at a very hinged, important moment of history. Maybe a kind of 500-year bookend. Because 500 years ago, with the voyages of Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama, the ascent of the West to global dominance took shape. The West, which we basically mean Western Europe, and then across the Atlantic, the United States, which came later. But the West was a small appendage of the world economy for much of human history. The big populations were in India and China, actually going back 2,000 years. So the West was the western end of this big Eurasian landmass, and it had a good showing in the Roman Empire, but after the end of the Western Roman Empire in 476, the so-called Dark Ages was a period of decline of cities, decline of technology, decline of well-being. And the big plays were in Asia, in the Arab lands, the Islamic lands, in India, in China, and so forth. The West rose after 1500, and that's what a huge part of economic and human history is about and studies and tries to understand. But industrialization came first in the West. And of course, it was interpreted by the West as first God-given right, and then second biological right, because already by the 18th and 19th centuries, European improvement was taken as genetic superiority. They didn't know about genes, but they knew about race. And this was now the white supremacy became a scientific of course, a pseudoscientific idea based on this historical swing where, for a lot of reasons, probably most importantly, the colonization of the Americas, this Western appendage or part of Eurasia became dominant. Now, by the end of the 19th century, the Western dominance was complete. You know, the Western powers could just kick the shit out of anybody, and they colonized every place in the world. Britain went to war with China over the most absurd and perfidious reason probably for any war in modern history, demanding that China open up its markets to British opium, the Opium Wars. This was the power, the arrogance, the insolence of the West. We are the inheritors of that insolence. We are of the view that we are superior, we are dominant. Yes, we should be the world's policemen. We run the world. And the neocons are the ultimate absurd trivialization and expression of this long process. People who have no historical sense, no prudence or judiciousness, but they think we're playing risk and we're going to put our piece on every part of the board. Now, the key point is, this claim of Western supremacy was a historical moment that is going away. And like most of human history, we're going to be in a world where different parts of the world have strengths and have power. And in many areas, China's more advanced than the United States in technology. In some areas, not as advanced in technology. And of course, throughout Asia, there's great leadership, and Russia has a lot of technology. So the idea, and a lot of smart people and a lot of great scientists and mathematicians and so on. So the idea that we're just going to kind of whisk Russia off the board, that this is easy, that's part of the delusional mindset of these neocons. And unfortunately, Biden is a kind of not much of a thinker ever in his life, but he's a kind of a fan of all of this along the way. So to put it in succinct terms, we're at the end of a 500-year swing, in my opinion. We've reached economically multipolarity. Yes, the U.S. is still strong. Don't panic. Good things are not, collapsing. It doesn't mean the end of the world. It just means other places have some chance. Thank you very much. It's not just the West. But we can't get this through our thick skulls, that other parts of the world can also have prosperity, can have innovation. Our line is, well, they must be cheating. They must have stolen everything. The fact that they have more scientists and engineers pouring out of their wonderful universities than the United States does never crossed the minds of these neocons. So this is really where we're at. Now, is anyone awake in our country in the security foreign policy blob? I'm hoping so. What I see right now as a kind of test of this is Foreign Affairs magazine. Now, that's the magazine of the Council on Foreign Relations. That's a kind of public-facing side of our security state, but core establishment. And the magazine, every issue, essentially every article is about one thing. Is America still on top? Is America still on top? How can we stop China? How do we remain? What about American hegemony? So there's a lot of angst about this because reality plays a role. Russia didn't just fold its hand when it was cut out from the SWIFT banking system. China's not just going away, and so on. Under our sanctions, we think we're containing China. Well, our latest absurdity is we say China has overcapacity. How about saying America has under capacity.
Right.
China's producing
Right.
a lot of things we should be producing. Why do you suddenly tar it as overcapacity? China's selling to the world competitively. They're the low-cost producers of electric vehicles. They're the low-cost producers of solar modules. They're the low-cost producers of wind turbines. They're the low-cost producers of fourth-generation modular nuclear. They're the low-cost producers of batteries. Oh, they have overcapacity, that perfidious country, you know? So I think that there's some recognition that the times are changing. I hope, obviously, that the neocons are at the end of their 30-year period, that, it's proven to be a disastrous idea. The world is not a game of risk, and if you treat it that way, you end up with the chance of nuclear war being 90 seconds to midnight, as the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists puts it. So I'm hoping that there is some realization we need a different approach.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.